It's not like, oh, we would like people to adopt AI. It's like, no, we're making it the top priority, and we're going to put our money where our mouth is, and we're going to reward people who make great contributions and stuff. And you just got to deal with all of the change and big stuff and give people support.
Hello, folks, and welcome to HangarDX podcast. This is a podcast about developer experience and how engineering teams solve productivity challenges at scale. I'm your host, Ankit, co-founder of Aviator. At Aviator, we are building AI coding verification platform to help you get better value out of AI. Today, my guest is Brian from Intercom, and Brian has recently written a very interesting post about how they internally are using Claude code, more specifically, leveraging a lot of value by creating like skills and knowledge frameworks. So we'll talk more about that into details. But before we get started, Brian, thank you so much for joining us today. I know you have our busy celebrity today, but let's start with a quick introduction. Give us a brief background of you at Intercom, and we'll dive into the topic.
Yeah, cheers so much, Ankit. It's great to be here. So I'm Brian. I work for Intercom. I've been working for Intercom for nearly 12 years. I'm based out of the Dublin office. So Dublin is, like, Intercom was co-founded in Dublin and San Francisco, and R&D has been led out of Dublin since day one. My role is I work on our platform team, we take care of everything from our availability, cost management, performance, but also like internal developer productivity, and we take that very seriously. At Intercom, we take a lot of pride or put a lot of importance in shipping all day, and being very fast at shipping and working very iteratively. It's not just for fun, it's because we believe it's the best way to build highest quality product. It's a deep part of our culture, and I've been fortunate enough to be like the steward of these systems for some time. And additionally, we have a bunch of monolithic applications that we love, and we spend a lot of time like making the platform like deeply into the monolith itself, all of the patterns and systems and things that like allow our product teams to build great features and not have to worry about all of the gunge and noise and stuff like that like my own teams kind of take care of. But these days, all I do is AI. So we've been very forward thinking on AI, not just in terms of our product. So we have pretty much pivoted the entire company to be working on Finn, our AI agent for customer support. And we've been very early and fast in the marketplace with both Finn, but also we've been adopting use of AI inside of our software development lifecycle and putting it to use well beyond software. Like absolutely almost everybody in Intercom is now using Claude Code. So this is all I do these days is like enabling people using AI and showing up in podcasts talking about AI.
Amazing. So we'll dive into your blog post that you wrote recently. I'll share in the show notes as well for folks who are listening. So before we get started, maybe give us a bit of an understanding of your skill. So how big is your platform team? How big is the engineering you're supporting?
Yeah, sure. So Intercom, we've got about, I'd say, between 300 and 400 engineers. Mm-hmm. Like engineering is the biggest team in the company. R&D is a huge part of what Intercom does, and like as a product company, we identify as a product company. We're always going to have like an outsized product team and engineering team. So we got in about 300 or 400 engineers. My own group, our platform group, I think we're about 20 something, maybe 30 engineers or so. We've got obviously a bunch of engineering managers and like technical program managers as well to assist us on running areas like availability, costs, performance, and things like that. We've been moving fast in figuring out ways and patterns of supporting the rollout of AI in our software development lifecycle. And over the last year, we put together basically a new full-time team and staffed it with our most senior, impactful, tenured people. So we decided that the transition to AI for all technical work is such a big deal that we need to put like many of our highest impact people on this stuff. And people who can get stuff done in Intercom and make decisions and things like that. So at this point, we've probably got about 8 people working full time on our AI platform as such. But there's a huge amount of overlap with like other parts that we're working on in other teams in the platform group and beyond. We've got a lot of bottoms up contributions and people working not quite full time, but spending a lot of their time, whether they're on product teams or in like our kind of classic systems teams or whatever. Like it's more than just 8 people working on this stuff. But we found definitely that we have to have like full-time attention to be able to give the right level of support and enablement and troubleshooting and tweaking Claude code and all that kind of stuff. And I only see us adding more and more people to like the full-time AI team as such.
Very cool. Okay, so I have a few things from your blog that I would want to kind of like touch on. The biggest one probably is the skills framework that you have created as a team. So maybe just kind of like, folks who have not read the blog, describe kind of like the scale of your skills today and kind of like how did you come to that level of skill?
We've been having a lot of success with skills and organizing them and just as a foundational building block for sharing things that work and getting feedback and improving, and really as the core part of the platform. So at this point, we've got about over 300 unique skills in a single like marketplace. The way we have gone, like even since I wrote the blog post or like tweet thread like nearly a month ago at this point, we've since created a large number of additional plugins. So nowadays, like teams pretty much have their own plugins, and they use this like single marketplace to distribute these plugins. But we do have a bunch of core skills and things that are set up so that we have the behavior of Claude Code well tuned for our environment. So a great example of this is like we've got this base plugin. We force it to be installed in every single installation of Claude Code, and what this does is it gathers basic telemetry. So it will publish using hooks in Claude Code, event information to Honeycomb. And so this is like which skills were invoked, what models are being used, kind of basic metadata about session information. And this is a public, internally accessible data set. Anyone can use it to kind of browse to see like what's going on, is my skill being used, surfacing those kind of insights. But we also collect the full session transcript. So we also have like as part of one of the shutdown hooks in Claude Code, we publish to S3 100% of the details of every single session that people are using inside of Intercom. This is for doing like deeper data mining. We do some basic tagging and kind of indexing of these things, but the purpose of this is really so that we can do a great job of, first of all, supporting hundreds of people using Claude Code. So people describe problems, people are having issues, and that can be everything from like Claude Code is not updating to I expected something to work and it didn't work out, or just a lot of like day-to-day kind of configuration settings. Having the session data available is like completely critical. So it's not just good enough to have kind of high-level metadata and observability, but like being able to debug deeply and having all that stuff ready to go and not have to ask people to like, upload your session data or whatever. That's been like a huge unblock. But even more importantly, it gives us insights to be able to like dig into, is this skill being used? And if so, is it getting people to like great outcomes fast? We want to know where skills are going wrong, or maybe we have the wrong skills, or we have gaps in coverage and stuff. And so mining the session data for this kind of stuff, obviously we talk to our users, we use these things ourselves, so we should be able to pick up most use cases. But we're a large organization, we mightn't see everything, and so that's where like getting these kind of basic data sets is so critical to be able to like have a flywheel of improving skills and finding out across like all technical work. So this is like foundational stuff, and we've also done some stuff like we use our internal IT systems to push out the latest versions of the plugins to everyone's laptop. So we don't rely on the built-in Claude Code kind of plugin update mechanisms. We'll push out default config for Claude Code, a bunch of stuff that we want in place, as well as the latest version of each plugins, because we were just having difficulty at scale making sure that like the exact right versions of the plugins are installed everywhere. It's almost like trying to trying to manage like hundreds of installs of Python on people's laptops. Like it's just no fun. Things go weird, and so by leveraging our IT systems to like publish these skills and configs onto everyone's laptops, we at the very least have like a known baseline configuration that we can work with, and that makes the job of like supporting hundreds of people using this platform a lot easier. So this stuff is like pretty important. It's not like rocket science, but like I think it's essential, especially with a tool that like is changing as fast and rapidly as Claude Code. You have to be able to work around some of the issues, or like if they have a bad push or whatever, you just want to get things to a good state for all your users as quickly as possible. So that's just the very, very core basic plugins that we build on top, or that we build these foundations on top of. Next, we have like a shared set of skills that are aimed for all developers inside of Intercom. And so these kind of core skills, we have like a very high bar for these. So absolutely everything in this like core set of skills must have great evals with them. They must have like real usage. Our philosophy here is that like we believe that we can build enough core skills or skills that will encapsulate or be able to do the vast majority of work that like a senior engineer can do. To do this, we have to do things to a very high standard. It's very easy to write a skill or to write some automation that looks like it's mostly doing the right thing. You can use it, and it might get you like 50% of the way there, or maybe like it might be helpful. But we can't tolerate that, or rather, like our ambition here is replacing all technical work, or making all technical work agent first. And for what this means in practice is we can't afford to have kind of low quality skills, or skills that aren't trustable. If people invoke them, or if Claude invokes them, that they don't immediately get to like the right path to carry out the job or task or whatever it is. And also, like monolithic skills, like are skills that try to do multiple things. They're just hard to test. It's like code. You need something that has a unit so that you can apply a unit test to. And I think what this means in the world of like skills and stuff for Claude Code is that we want to pick discrete individual tasks, get a skill, work with that skill, and get it to like a world class, like as good as our best engineers at doing whatever task it is, and then lock in the behavior and with evals and testing, and obviously a lot of real world usage, and then keep it there at this high quality bar forever. And examples of skills in these areas will be like troubleshooting issue, or fixing a flaky spec, or dealing with certain types of alarms. It's far more profound or larger in scope than just writing code. These are like any technical task that we are doing kind of day to day as part of our job as engineers. And so, yeah, these skills are all like little building blocks, but we take the time and sweat the detail on making sure that they are great and almost near perfect at what they do. And then we move on to like the next skill. And the idea that like we're going to end up with hundreds of these skills and all combined together, it's like you kind of assemble a senior engineer out of that.
Amazing. Okay, that was a lot. There is a lot to unpack here. I have my list of questions based on sort of all the things that you mentioned. Let's just start from the beginning. Okay, so you created 300 skills. How do you think about the issue of context window? I know kind of like we talk about, okay, there's 1 million tokens, so you don't need to really too much worry about context window. But we also know as you add more and more context to any prompt, the quality degrades. So do you folks think about that? Is there some sort of like a philosophy behind how big a skill can it be, and like, how many skills are being used at any given time?
Yeah, we try and apply quality control to the skills. So we've got skills that grade our skills, and certainly like size is an important part of that. We want to avoid invoking skills or having skills like dominate or clog up the context window. The other thing though is like we use dozens of plugins. So most of the 300 skills, they're partitioned off to like team specific or area specific plugins. And you'll only enable those plugins if you're on that team or you're doing some work in that area. So say, for example, we have a skill that is used to help us upgrade Ruby on Rails. So these days we run pretty much the cutting edge version of Ruby on Rails, and we do a weekly sync to whatever the release candidate is at the moment. And like, this is great, but like, there's a lot of repetitive work in actually just doing the job of like syncing the latest version of Rails. And so we have a skill which does all the boring stuff. But like, there's only so many people who are actually upgrading Rails in Intercom. It's pretty much one team. They own that. No one else needs to be kind of exposed to this skill or whatever. So we have a plugin specific for that team. And teams can create whatever plugins they want. It can be shared across groups of teams, or it can be shared like thematically, depending on the nature of the work being done or whatever. But mostly it's mostly teams, but that the way they organize it. And I guess we've got like a lower quality bar for these kind of team skills and stuff. So we want to encourage people to be automating their work, to be trying things out, to produce a bunch of skills. And like, we're all on this learning journey, and it's all pretty cutting edge stuff. And like, so we want to make it easy for people to like contribute and get started. And this is why like plugins are great, because people can like produce workflows that might be like highly opinionated and specific to a team's workflows or the way they work or whatever. And it doesn't matter if they do this. They're not going to like poison my context window. I'm not going to accidentally invoke their skills or whatever. So the plugin structure makes this manageable. And it means that, yeah, we're not dominating a load of like loading in hundreds and hundreds of skills at every single Claude Code session. And so in practice, I think people would probably have like dozens of these skills available. And we practice the continuous improvement by running the skill improving skill against it, and to make sure that like we're doing a good job of managing the core stuff. And then of course, like if people want to build these wild, large, big skills that do all sorts of things, they can do that, but it's not going to like degrade things for everybody else. Every so often we'll run, get some statistics or metrics out of Claude Code to make sure that we're not like completely killing our context windows with all of the skills and MCPs and all this other stuff that we configured. And I think it's very manageable at the moment, and we encourage people to use Opus with large context windows as well. So we're not seeing degradation.
Interesting. So in that like explanation, you mentioned skill improving skill. Tell me more about that.
Sure. Anthropic have some of these themselves. I think they might even be part of superpowers, or maybe they're part of like the Anthropic plugin marketplace. But yeah, there's some well-known patterns around skills, and we have our own kind of opinions about them as well. And it's really encoding the kind of information that, like, if I was peer reviewing somebody's skill, if somebody asked me for feedback, we try to put this information into like a skill itself that can grade our skills. And like some of it is that it's a bunch of basic stuff, like that the skill is well named. You want agents to invoke these things at the right time. That means that they need to be called the right things, and that the names are specific enough so that an agent can understand what the purpose of these things are. And then that the description, like any metadata, is again just accurate. Easier said than done, I guess, at times. And then we look at things like, size of the skill, compare it for any kind of redundant information, or if there's overlap with other skills. This is kind of interesting information to have, because you want to break things out into like small discrete components, or we want to, as much as possible. And that means being vigilant about like what's in the skills and making sure that like there's not a lot of overlap. And it's also pretty easy to end up just putting a lot of like superfluous information in the skills, stuff that like is kind of unnecessarily verbose. You might tell it like, when you open a pull request, use this thing to notify the Slack channel. We've already encoded that. That's already elsewhere, in the context window. You don't need to put that into every single skill, even though so it's not wrong information. It's just like overly verbose, or just like we know that we've already given the appropriate guidance elsewhere. So, and then just making sure that any of the important skills of like appropriate evals and tests in place, and you're just making sure that like you're doing at least the basics, or that the eval lists cover most of the use cases that the skill claims to actually cover. You can write evals and just not be testing the right stuff. So like that's the basic operations of the skill improving skill. We like the idea, and we're starting to do more of like self updating code bases or self-improving code bases, and skills are like where we've started off with that. And say I have a weekly job that runs on all of our main GitHub repositories, and it verifies that everything in Claude.md and every file that's referred to in the Claude.md files, it just fact checks them and just make sure that like any references are still accurate. It compares it with also it does like it runs the equivalent of like /init to generate new ones and just sees as like is there new information, and maybe Anthropic under the hood have like updated their prompts for init or whatever. And the job also does a check of like what has changed in the last week, like any big architecture patterns or anything, and tries to encode that into the Claude.md files. And well, in practice, we haven't actually had that many interesting updates from those. It's mostly the fact checking just to make sure that, you know, what's in Claude.md doesn't get pointlessly stale and like completely wrong. As long as you can trust them, you know, then people will be happy to kind of contribute to them and add to them. And it's kind of like a backstop as well to make sure that whatever is in them is accurate and that you can trust them. And so I think that we're starting to do self-updating code bases, and like all of our skills tend to mention like if you learn new information, you should update the skill as well. And so that's a good way of like at least hinting towards the agents and people using the skills that like they should be updated if the skill doesn't get things right perfectly first time. So it's I think this stuff sounds better than what we've seen in practice so far, but like at the very least, I know that my Claude.mds are like accurate, which is nice.
That's amazing. So it's kind of like is also somewhat similar pattern to what Karpathy wrote a few weeks ago about kind of like those self-updating knowledge systems.
Yeah, I think like knowledge harvesting at the moment just is like pretty manual. You have to remember to like tell Claude, like if it gets things wrong or goes down the wrong route, you have to go, you know, why didn't this get it right first time? And you have to remember, okay, now I have to go in and update some guidance or update the skill or whatever. And that's what we're kind of betting on at the moment. Like we're pushing and asking everybody in Intercom to work like this, to like know that our job and the most important thing that we're doing in R&D is making all technical work agent first. And so what is our roles there? It's like, well, you're going to be driving the agents, and it's our job to like notice when it's getting things wrong or when it's not getting things perfect first time, and then to do something about it. And a lot of the time that might be creating internal APIs, giving access to data, giving access to systems, whatever. But like we've pretty much done that now for almost everything. And now next is we all act as like part of the flywheel, continuously improving the skills and everything like that. And but it's pretty manual. And like I guess that's where we're hoping things like session data might help us out, being able to like mine this stuff, like try and proactively discover this stuff. Because at the moment we're kind of relying on almost like best intentions from everyone. Now we're telling everyone it's very important and that it's the most critical thing we're doing, and we are getting like extremely good traction on it. But it kind of feels dissatisfying that like we know that there's knowledge that the agents don't have that could unblock a lot of stuff, and we're kind of waiting for humans to kind of tell them and hint towards the agents at the moment.
Nice. So just to kind of like, you know, recap a little bit, essentially what you're talking a lot about is the not just kind of like creating skills, but it's also like the quality of skills. And I really like the framework. You know, you're also talking about like not just the evals, right? Like evals is like one part how you're measuring the quality, but like it's also sort of like about, you know, how effective it is, how much content is there, like are they kind of like very direct versus sort of like trying to do a lot of different things. So that's very cool. So just kind of like maybe a little bit extending onto that, I would love to understand how you think about as a platform lead, like how much of skill maintenance is your work versus individual developers' work?
Yeah, it's a good question. We have a culture of strong ownership in Intercom. And, you know, if I look at, say, the way my platform group has been working over the last while, like we take strong ownership over the operations and running of our Rails application or our cloud environment. We don't treat these things like a black box or that it's someone else's responsibility, that we act as if it's our application and our cloud environment. Or so like how this works in practice is, say, like we want to improve CI/CD, like say deployment times or whatever. We can do whatever we want in the app. It's not a black box. Like we obviously run the CI/CD platform, and we integrate things and do glue work, and we work with vendors and we optimize everything and that. A lot of the impact, a lot of the work to having great CI/CD for a large application is actually going into the application and maybe changing the test suite, changing how it works, changing like the different approaches, introducing new patterns, all of that. So we already have this approach of like taking very strong ownership of the things, the areas that we're stewarding and kind of responsible for. In other companies, it's definitely the case that other teams will act like more like a black box, or they can't get involved or influence the application in different ways. I think that's maybe a thing of scale as well, or different ways that different companies and teams are organized. But in Intercom, strong ownership. And so in practice, what this means is we would take strong ownership over the skills, certainly the core, and we considered ourselves to be the maintainers of this. And it's on us to make sure that they're great and that they're always great and that we know they're great and we can prove they're great, and that it's the outcomes of their use that we really care most about, not just that they exist or that people are contributing to them or whatever. But we also very conscious that this is a very distributed piece of work. Most work happens on a team level. A lot of these kind of skills will be needed to be owned and produced by people working on individual areas. So like if I'm working on the Intercom inbox, chances are you're probably going to want a bunch of inbox specific skills to help you like debug or troubleshoot or do QA, and there's probably a bunch of generic stuff in there as well that could be shared with other people. But you still want to have like the inbox team feeling like supported and capable and able to like produce high quality skills with good feedback and systems and mechanisms to help them out with that. So our job is not just like maintain the core, but it's also to do all of the great enablement work to make everyone else successful as they kind of maintain and own their stuff. And so we're not trying to gatekeep skills or be like all of these are ours. Like we're happy for everyone to like have ownership of their areas and ownership of their stuff and have people decide their own kind of quality bar in those kind of areas as well. But we'll help and we'll be proactive in like giving insights or giving tips or even just answering questions. Like a lot of this is like we're trying to get people to change how they're working, to adopt new technologies, to like think about things a lot differently. And a lot of the work there is just like having conversations, chatting with people, supporting them, like answering basic questions. It's like just tech support and like basic chats about what you're trying to do. Like a lot of that work is like completely essential and like very important to get right and staff it right and stuff like that.
That's very cool. So again, double clicking on this, I feel like this is sort of like going into this deeper direction. But in the HangarDX community that we run, we talk about like developer experiences, sort of like three pillars, like people, processes, and tools, right? So maybe sort of like related to this is what have you seen as sort of like both successes and failures in terms of like getting people to adopt these kind of like tools or skills or like frameworks, right? I mean, obviously one is like, yes, you're kind of like deploying these things automatically to their systems. But many times you've also noticed there are organizations and developers, specifically some organizations who are like, oh, I can just do it manually. Like, why should I even go into Claude code to actually even use a skill to do something?
Yeah, so we've done some pretty direct and successful ways of encouraging use or getting people to use these things. So first of all, we set a goal. We set a target. So about a year ago, we were talking about adoption of AI, and we're kind of dissatisfied. We weren't seeing like transformation inside of our software teams. There were some good signs. There were some areas that where the tools, especially at the time, just seemed to be like suit certain types of work. But it was extremely poorly distributed. Some individuals were doing well, but we just weren't seeing like a big transformation. And so we set a goal. Our CTO set a goal of doubling throughput on our team, and that is the number of pull requests per head in R&D. We want that to double in a year. And we could argue all day about whether pull requests is a great metric. There's loads of reasons why you could say it's not a great metric. And also, if something is a measure, it's no longer a great measure. But and all of that can be true, but I think it's still completely reasonable and rational to expect a large increase in the sheer volume of work going through the system, of changes going through the system. If you truly believe in what the impact and potential of AI and like where it's going, it's clear that everyone is going to be able to get a lot more work done at a higher quality, higher volume, and that you should naturally see, just through, without even pushing for it, a large increase in the amount of throughput going through our systems. So that was like almost like the stick. We set a goal, and arguably like 2x isn't even big enough. Maybe it should have been 10x, but it was a good start. You have to start somewhere. The other things we did were like we updated job descriptions. So we made it extremely clear that everyone's role involves adoption and rollout of AI in their jobs. If you're not contributing to that, if you're not doing that, you're no longer meeting expectations. So again, this is kind of more stick than carrot, but you need to be extremely clear. Like now, the kind of more positive side of these things were the kind of carrot. We did a lot of enablement, and we ran things like hackathons. We've run AI immersion days. We've got Slack channels where people share success stories or just ask questions, and people unblock each other. We build a culture of people sharing stuff that's working and building like hype about it. And of course, you have to like, what is leadership? Leadership is like showing up to every single meeting, every single forum, every single channel, doesn't matter, and just staying on message and saying the same thing over and over and over. And it is, hey, we're moving everything to all technical work to be agentic, and just repeating that over and over and over, so it's very clear to people. And like it's organizational change. Like we are demanding effectively that people completely change their jobs and change how they work and change how they produce things. And like to do this, you have to give room for growth. You have to give support. You have to, but obviously you have to give access to the tools and things like that. But you have to do things like promote people for contributing positively, or like give spot bonuses, or like publicly praise people for contributing to these things. So it's no one trick here, but it's extremely clear to anyone who's in Intercom and now beyond Intercom that like we are clear and direct, and like this is meaningful for us. It's not like we would like people to adopt AI. It's like, no, we're making it the top priority, and we're going to put our money where our mouth is, and we're going to reward people who make great contributions and stuff. And you just got to deal with all of the change and big stuff and give people support. People need to be in psychologically safe environments to be able to adapt, to change things, to fail. All of this stuff is like part of the journey. But we're kind of on the other side of this now, as in we got like momentum. People can see the results, and that's certainly making things easier for us.
Amazing. So I know you're coming close to time. Actually, we are over time, but I still have 2 more questions I at least want to cover.
Sure.
We can do it quickly. I mean, there were a lot more, but I'm gonna just narrow down to 2. So first is production access. This is something that you actually did. You wrote it in the blog. How do you build that trust? Like I kind of like feel like still today we do a lot of debugging through Claude Code ourselves, but like we are still very like we have not given database access.
Yeah.
It has log access, which is anonymized. So how do you handle that?
Yeah, I've definitely had a good few kind of uncomfortable moments over the last like 6 months where I realize that I need to let the agent do the work that I'm doing, and whether that's like production access to AWS, or running queries directly on a database, or even the first time I connected it up with Snowflake and started like gathering log data and stuff like that. You're like, can I do this? is this allowed? Is this dangerous? But we also have the advantage that we're like a 15-year-old mature SaaS business, and we've always had the Ruby on Rails console. It's just that it was behind this crummy interface where you have to like SSH onto a host and run Rails console interactively. And ironically, like when I joined Intercom, our customer support team used to be in the Rails console all the time. It was, we hadn't built a load of fancy web admin tools, and the customer support people were fairly savvy with like being hands-on with Ruby and stuff. But over time, as you get bigger as a company, you just have to standardize tooling and stuff like that. And you can't rely on people logging into production as easy. But we've always had a need for this, and engineers log in and do work in the Rails console all the time. So we put in place good controls for those use cases. So we've got a mature security program. We identify risks in our environment, and we mitigate these risks by doing things like making it you can't mutate or change database records inside the Rails console unless you add a specific flag. There's a full audit trail. We send all the logs of console usage to Panther, our SIEM system. And so we've got controls, auditing, default access is restricted, locked down to like basically a read-only type view. But yeah, doing some work on the Rails console, and I was asking Claude some questions. I was like, hey, can you figure out how to get this data? And I realized just like, why am I acting as a proxy here? This is completely silly. I just need to give Claude access. And so I wrote a simple API that plugged into our like internal API and MCP setup, and that allowed Claude Code to basically run arbitrary Ruby statements in production. And now it's built on top of all the kind of controls that we have in place already for the Rails console not to be this place where people can do whatever they want. And then we added in some more controls as well. We just made sure that just in case Claude goes completely rogue and tries to, I don't know, navigate our network or make the kind of calls that like you really wouldn't expect Claude Code to be making. But the amazing thing is, I kind of soft launched it. I didn't really tell anyone about it. But I was checking on usage, and it turns out that the top 5 users were all like non-technical. As in, they weren't engineers. They were product managers, customer support people, designers, design managers, and they were working with Claude in a way that they were just asking questions. They were doing analysis. They were like, I don't know, looking at like how this customer uses this, what's the configuration for that customer. And Claude would sometimes be able to get that information from Snowflake or some other internal API. But then when it couldn't, like Claude knew that it could run arbitrary Rails code and would just go, I can figure that out, and would just execute Rails code like as if they were on the console on behalf of these users. And the amazing thing is like these people didn't even know this capability exists. They would never log into the Rails console to like do this stuff. Claude knows that, when you've got stuff well configured and you've got kind of capabilities and you've got skills that kind of guide Claude and that know what can get done. It was like being invoked just naturally because the people were explaining to Claude, here's what I'm trying to achieve. And it would figure out that it could use the Rails API to do that stuff. And when you see this happen, suddenly you realize, like, why didn't I give access to Claude Code for this stuff sooner? Yeah, it is right to be like apprehensive or like concerned about like, okay, what's the risk here? What damage can be done, whatever. But we've been fortunate to just build on top of great building blocks. And of course, tighten things up a bit more. You want to give Claude access to as much as possible, but avoid the kind of damage. So in practice, that means a lot of the time it's like mostly read-only access to everything, and then maybe for specific functions, you might have like some APIs that might do server-side validation to make sure it's not like gone completely rogue and like changing like thousands of things or whatever, or like the wrong things. And like that's been a pretty sweet spot for us to be in. And just like it's amazing when you see the usage, like non-technical engineers doing work with Claude that like if like they would never have been able to get that done. Even they wouldn't even know who to ask to be able to answer these questions in our environment. So yeah, it's pretty cool.
So it's like you're not giving dangerously skip permissions for every Claude job.
No, and like this is part of the config that we push out to everyone's laptops. Is like we override a bunch of the defaults. We'll set a bunch of these things. We'll allow certain tools to be used. But yeah, we make sure that we've got good control over the defaults. That
Nice.
It's not. It doesn't stop all adversarial kind of access, but it just makes sure that the default path is just safe and easy and nice and won't do anything weird.
Got it. So maybe final question. We'll see. I do have others, but let's stop here. So you are very heavily dependent now on Claude Code. Does that worry you? Like, I mean, like 2 hours ago, Claude was down. Have you thought about like that for like how does it like look like in the future?
Yeah, we have fallbacks already to Bedrock. So we're big AWS users. We're also big users of Bedrock for our product. And yeah, right now, like I've got somewhere in my terminal history, just like the settings that will allow me to fall back to Bedrock if Claude Code, if the models aren't accessible directly from Anthropic, and so that's a good fallback. Yeah, it's weird. It's like a business continuity risk now for us, is access to this one tool. As such, like this is business as usual. Like we have a business continuity program. This is now just part of that. It's like, what if AWS goes down? It's like, well, now we're asking ourselves, what if Anthropic goes down? Yeah, so the mitigations that we have is like, be multi-provider in terms of model access. This was already what we do in our product. So we've been on, say, Anthropic models for quite some time, but we we load balance, or rather we do like active and failover between Google, Anthropic, and Bedrock for access to LLMs, because I think no provider is anywhere near like doesn't have the kind of level of uptime that we need to be able to ship great product. Never mind like build our whole business around it. So I think today there's no option other than having like multiple keys set up and ready to go and multiple access methods. And so that's our primary, I guess, business continuity mitigation at the moment, is like we will fall back to Bedrock, or we're ready to go with configs that will use Bedrock for that stuff. I do think as well, like we made a platform choice. We went all in on Cloud Code, and that was part of that's been part of the success of the 2x push at Intercom. Once we decided we're on one platform, one tool, and treating Cloud Code not as like a tool but as a platform, that's when we saw absolute like huge increase in use of Cloud Code. So again, being very clear and direct and picking one tool, we found that was extremely important. And we don't even have the opinion that like, oh, Cloud Code is better. It might, like any tool can be better at one period of time, but it's kind of like arguing like which cloud provider is better. It kind of doesn't matter. You need to pick one and get all the compounding benefits of the being all in on one system. So we think of Cloud Code like that. Should Anthropic kind of start falling behind, Cloud Code no longer is like the cutting edge or whatever, I'm pretty confident that we can move to Codex or whatever. I think the barrier to movement just isn't that high these days. Now, I think Cloud Code is great. No plans to move off. We love working with Anthropic. But I think the barrier to movement, ironically, aided by tools like Cloud Code or whatever, just isn't that high. But, certainly today, I would find it difficult to be able to have the same high quality bar and like running evals and everything if we were multi-agent. It's worth it in certain cases. We'll be multi-agent on things like code review, like for specific use cases. It's a good idea to have like multiple agents in on the go, and we use multiple agents all the time for Fin. But for like, I think day-to-day use, just using one system, one platform, and verifiably and proving out that the system works to hand, or works well. I think it's hard enough to do that for one system. Never mind like multiple systems. So I think that's like maybe the long-term way I think about are we getting stuck with Anthropic? Are we getting stuck to Cloud Code? I think it's like largely yes. We have mitigations for availability of models, but worst case, I think we can migrate at some stage in the future. I don't think it would be like that big a lift, though I'd prefer just never to have to do that.
All right. I know we went way over time, so let's
Sure.
stop there. Thank you so much, Brian. This was an amazing conversation. Love all the creative work you folks are doing, and kind of like getting more out of Cloud Code, because obviously everyone uses coding agents, but it's also great to really push the boundaries and become the enabler for the rest of the developers, and that's been great. And obviously at Aviator we also strive to do a lot of that. So everyone who's listening, thank you so much for joining in. If you're interested more in developer experience related stuff, if you work in platform engineering, or like Brian, you kind of like try to enable other developers in AI, join us in our HangarDX community. It's dx.community. We run virtual sessions, and obviously we bring in people like Brian to give some of these talks. So until next time, thank you so much for everyone for listening. See you again. Thanks, Brian.
Cheers, Ankit.
Right.